You know, that moment when someone disappears, completely vanishes from your life. And just when you've begun to pick yourself up, they come back. Suddenly, there's a message, a call, a "Hey, how have you been?" And it stirs something in you, confusion, hope, maybe even a little excitement. But here's the real question. Why? Why do they come back after pulling away, after silence, after you've done the hard work of moving on? When a man pulls away or disappears, it often leaves the other person feeling confused, hurt, and full of questions. One of the most common reasons men return after a period of no contact is because the initial withdrawal wasn't really about you. It was about him trying to regain a sense of control or importance. In the early stages of dating or even in long-term relationships, men sometimes feel overwhelmed, emotionally vulnerable, or unsure of their own feelings. Rather than communicate those emotions openly, they retreat. That retreat becomes a way for them to create space and, subconsciously or not, test what it feels like to be in control of the emotional pace of the relationship. In many cases, men associate control with strength. When they begin to feel emotionally dependent or too invested, a fear mechanism kicks in. The instinct is to reclaim emotional space. This act of stepping away allows them to feel like they're back in the driver's seat. It's not always logical, and it's rarely fair, but it's a defense strategy designed to protect their sense of masculinity or emotional independence. However, what they don't anticipate is how the absence affects them as much as it affects you. Over time, without the emotional presence and attention they used to receive, they begin to feel the void they created. That's when the longing returns, not always because they truly want a relationship again, but because they miss the version of themselves that felt validated and wanted. The dynamic of power and importance is deeply tied to a man's identity. When he senses that pulling away gave him the upper hand, it can feed a part of his ego that wants to know he still matters. This is where things get complicated. If you've maintained your boundaries and haven't chased after him during the no-contact period, his return is often triggered by the realization that he's no longer in control. The balance has shifted. You've shown strength in your silence, and that unsettles him. Suddenly, he's the one wondering how you feel, whether you still care, and if he still holds value in your eyes. Men often don't articulate this consciously. They might say they miss you, or they were just thinking about you, or even that they made a mistake. But beneath those words lies a deeper drive, the need to feel significant again. Reaching out after no contact is often less about reconnection and more about reaffirmation. He wants to know that the door is still open, that his absence didn't permanently close his access to you. This is why the no-contact period becomes such a powerful mirror. It shows him what life is like without your energy, your attention, your warmth. And if he's used to feeling important in your world, that absence hits differently. When a man goes silent and creates a space where there once was consistent communication, that gap doesn't just sit empty, it becomes filled with curiosity, anticipation, and emotional tension. Human beings are wired to seek closure, and when we don't get it, our minds go into overdrive trying to fill in the blanks. This is exactly what happens during a period of no contact. For the man who initiates the silence, he may assume that distancing himself will make things simpler, less intense, or even allow him to escape emotional responsibility. But what often happens instead is that the emotional charge he tried to avoid starts to build, not fade. The more time passes, the more that initial silence becomes a loud echo in his mind. He begins to wonder what you're thinking, whether you've moved on if you're hurting, or if you've already replaced him. It's in this psychological uncertainty that curiosity takes root. Curiosity, when mixed with nostalgia and a fear of being forgotten, becomes a powerful motivator. He may start revisiting old photos, rereading messages, or even asking mutual friends about you. Not because he's planning a grand return, but because he's trying to manage his growing emotional discomfort with the unknown. The emotional tension grows especially when he notices that you're not reaching out. In his mind, he may have expected you to chase, to ask why he disappeared, or to seek closure. When that doesn't happen, the absence of your reaction creates a sense of emotional imbalance. He begins to feel the consequences of his silence in ways he didn't predict. You're no longer predictable. That mystery is both unsettling and alluring. Men are often drawn to what they can't quite figure out, and your calm detachment begins to shift the dynamic entirely. At the same time, silence is a mirror. It forces him to sit with his thoughts, his emotions, and the choices he made. It doesn't matter how rational he tried to be in cutting off communication. Emotions don't follow logic. He might replay past conversations, moments where he felt connected, or the specific way you made him feel seen. Those emotional memories resurface stronger when you're no longer there to reinforce them. The absence sharpens the contrast of what was once present. That contrast creates a longing, a pull toward what he thinks he's missing. It's also important to understand that the curiosity he feels isn't always about you specifically. It's about how he felt when he was with you. Men often associate their emotional experiences with the people who were present when they felt those things. So when he starts to miss the feeling of being understood, valued, or desired, his mind connects those emotions with your presence. That makes the urge to return feel personal, even if he hasn't fully processed the deeper reasons behind it. He might tell himself he's just checking in or being polite, but at the core, he's reacting to the emotional tension that no contact has created between you. Ego and insecurity are two of the most underestimated forces behind why men return after no contact. On the surface, it might look like they've had a change of heart, like they've finally realized what they lost. But more often than not, their reappearance is less about love and more about soothing their ego or calming their internal doubts. When a man pulls away, he might initially feel powerful, like he's in control of the situation. He assumes that if he ever decides to come back, you'll be there, waiting, open, and receptive. That belief feeds his sense of importance. But when time passes and he hears nothing from you, no texts, no calls, no reaction, his self-assured narrative begins to crack. Insecurity creeps in when the expected response doesn't come. He starts to wonder, why hasn't she reached out? Has she moved on? Did I not matter as much as I thought? These questions don't just stay quiet in the back of his mind. They get louder with every passing day of silence. The longer you stay quiet, the more his internal certainty begins to feel like uncertainty. This discomfort becomes a challenge to his ego, and to restore his emotional footing, he reaches out. Not necessarily because he wants to build something meaningful again, but because he needs reassurance that he still matters to you. This is where many people get confused. When a man returns, he might say all the right things, act charming, even seem regretful. But the driver behind his actions can be deeply rooted in his own desire to feel significant again. It's not always intentional manipulation. Sometimes it's just emotional survival. He needs to prove to himself that he can still affect you, that he still has access to your time, your energy, your heart. In that moment, he's not thinking about your needs, your healing, or the pain his silence may have caused. He's trying to fix the dent in his ego that your strength and silence created. This is especially true if he notices you've moved on, you're glowing, you're unbothered. That realization stings more than he expected. Your emotional independence sends a message. You're no longer waiting, and he's no longer the center of your world. For someone whose sense of self-worth was partially tied to your attention, that can feel like a threat. The return then becomes a way to reassert his importance and reclaim emotional ground that he believes he lost. Insecure people often fear being forgotten more than they fear losing someone. A man driven by insecurity doesn't want to lose relevance in your life. When he feels like that relevance is slipping away, he reappears not necessarily to fix things or offer clarity, but to restore a sense of self-importance. Even if he doesn't fully understand his own motives, what he's chasing is the feeling of being wanted, missed, or needed. The return isn't always about repairing the bond. It's often about repairing his confidence that he still has a place in your world when a man pulls away or disappears. He often does so believing that what he's leaving behind will remain still, unchanged, accessible, and waiting. But what he doesn't always account for is the emotional impact of time and distance, not just on you, but on himself. While he's gone, something unexpected begins to happen. His memory of you becomes filtered through the lens of nostalgia. The emotional high points stand out more sharply, the arguments and tension begin to blur, and the value you brought starts to shine more clearly than ever. Time away from you creates contrast, and that contrast makes him reevaluate what he had. At first, the distance might have felt like relief. Space can feel empowering, especially if he was emotionally overwhelmed or uncertain. But once the noise of daily life settles and new distractions fail to measure up, the mind naturally wanders back. The little things, your voice, your laughter, the way you understood his moods, how you made him feel seen, start to resurface. Those small, intimate moments that seemed ordinary at the time take on a different weight when they're no longer present. He begins to remember how you contributed to his life, not just emotionally, but also in terms of stability, inspiration, or comfort. Men often don't realize the depth of someone's presence until it becomes an absence. And when they start to notice that something feels missing, something warm, grounding, consistent, it triggers a mental and emotional inventory. They compare. Consciously or unconsciously, they look at others through the filter of what you offered. That comparison usually doesn't favor the new. The unique connection you had, even if flawed or complex, starts to feel rare in hindsight. The realization doesn't always come in a flash. It builds slowly through moments of discomfort, loneliness, or unmet emotional needs. There's also the element of emotional safety you may have given him that's hard to find again. When someone has held space for you, listened without judgment, supported you through your lows, celebrated your wins, it creates a sense of emotional home. That's not something people forget easily. When he starts to feel emotionally adrift or uncertain in his own life, it's natural for him to want to return to what once felt like stability. Even if he couldn't articulate it while you were present, he now senses it in your absence. What complicates things is that men often realize this value too late. They assumed you'd always be emotionally available, that your affection would wait in the wings while they explored other paths or focused on themselves. But seeing you thrive without them, or even just witnessing your strength in silence, forces a reevaluation of your worth. He starts to grasp that your presence was never guaranteed, and that awareness activates something powerful. The decision to return is often sparked by the late arrival of clarity, the kind that only time, distance, and quiet reflection can deliver. When you go silent after someone disappears, it's more than just a reaction, it's a statement. It shows that you're not sitting in a place of desperation or waiting for scraps of attention. This silence, especially when maintained with self-respect and composure, shifts the emotional power dynamic between you and the man who walked away. He expected a reaction, a question, a chase, but instead, he's met with stillness. That stillness sends a loud message. You're no longer available to be controlled by his inconsistency. And whether he admits it or not, that change unsettles him. During no contact, the growth you experience is not just internal. It becomes visible in your energy. Maybe you've started focusing more on your personal goals, your health, your peace. Maybe you're not as emotionally reactive anymore, not posting cryptic stories or asking mutual friends about him. Instead, you've channeled your attention inward. That shift doesn't go unnoticed. In fact, it's often the very thing that draws him back. The version of you he remembers, the one that was more emotionally invested, more giving, more readily available, has evolved. And that evolution can be deeply attractive, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. Men are drawn to women who are rooted in their own self-worth. When you grow during the silence, when you prove to yourself that your world doesn't collapse in his absence, you break the invisible contract he thought you had, that he could come and go and still be central in your life. The new version of you is more centered, more discerning, and less likely to tolerate emotional breadcrumbs. That makes you a mystery again, not in a manipulative way, but in a way that's grounded in quiet strength. And for many men, that's compelling because it challenges them to show up differently if they want another chance. This shift in power is rarely acknowledged out loud, but it's felt. He knows something is different. The energy you give off isn't desperate or validating. It's detached, calm, and in control. That energy has gravity. He may have thought that the distance would create space for him to breathe, but instead it created space for you to grow. And now you're no longer orbiting his world. That realization challenges his ego, his assumptions, and his previous sense of superiority in the relationship dynamic. Your growth during no contact acts like a mirror, reflecting back to him everything he might have taken for granted. It shows him that you've changed, but more importantly, it shows him that the access he once had is no longer guaranteed. That access used to be easy, predictable. Now, it's something he may have to earn, and that changes the entire dynamic. He may return, expecting the same patterns to continue, only to find that you've rewritten the rules. You're no longer reacting from a place of emotional need, but responding from a place of self-awareness and value recognition. That evolution is what disrupts the old power dynamic and repositions you as the one who chooses, not the one who waits to be chosen. When a man returns after no contact, it can be tempting to believe it's a sign of renewed commitment, clarity, or a desire to build something meaningful again. But what's often overlooked is that not all returns are rooted in genuine intention. Many times, a man's reappearance is not about love or long-term vision. It's about access, emotional, physical, or even psychological access to the space you once gave him so freely. He may not want a full relationship, but he wants the benefits of being close to you without the responsibility that comes with it. This can be subtle and hard to recognize in the moment because his words may sound sincere, even romantic, but his actions tell a different story. Men are often conditioned to value freedom and autonomy, which sometimes leads them to distance themselves when things feel too intense or vulnerable. But that same freedom loses its appeal when they begin to feel disconnected or lonely. That's when they start to crave the familiarity of your presence, not necessarily to recommit, but to refill an emotional or physical need that you used to meet. They remember how you made them feel, desired, supported, admired. They miss the version of themselves they were when they were around you. And instead of confronting that emptiness by doing the internal work, they seek the short-cut reaching back out to you. The dangerous part is how skillfully this can be disguised. He might say he's been thinking about you, that he regrets pulling away, or that he just wants to reconnect. But if you pay close attention, the effort often lacks consistency. He may initiate contact, only to disappear again after he gets a response. He might test the waters to see if you're still emotionally available, if he can still stir something in you, or if you're still holding space for him. Once he confirms that door is open, he might not step through it, because it was never really about stepping back into a relationship. It was about confirming he still had access to the emotional comfort you once offered. This kind of behavior can be confusing because it creates emotional whiplash. One day he's warm, the next he's distant. The return can feel meaningful, but it often lacks depth. You might find that when you try to have real conversations about the relationship, future plans, or emotional accountability, he becomes evasive or non-committal. That's because his goal wasn't clarity, it was contact, and once that need is met, the urgency disappears. The truth is, someone who returns without changed behavior, emotional growth, or a willingness to communicate openly isn't offering a new beginning. They're repeating an old pattern. What makes this situation even more complex is that you may still care, still feel that pull, still want to believe it's different this time. That hope can make you overlook the signs, but the reality is, not every return is an act of love. Sometimes it's simply an attempt to regain something he lost, not you, but the comfort, validation, or control he once had when you were still available to him without question.